I've never been interested in the subject of wars. I'm a type of person who would try to forget about the reality then accept that terrible things did happen. Because in a war, everyone has to suffer, no matter which side you are. If I have to know something about a war, I want to know how did people feel, what did they think, and did they fight for their beliefs. For that reason, my presentation today is about the cultural resistance in the time of Vietnam War. All the memories of the Vietnam War have more or less faded away in the minds of both Americans and Vietnamese. The war left a deep impression, especially in the changes of American culture and society. So, why the war started? The Vietnam War was a happening in the Cold War between the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Northern Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, followed a communist path with the support of the Soviet Union and China. Meanwhile, with the design to regain control in Indochina, France helped the French-educated Vietnamese Emperor Bảo Đại to establish the state of Vietnam in southern Vietnam. The French were later defeated by the Viet Minh of Ho Chi Minh, and after that, Ngô Đình Diệm, an anti-communist, pushed Bảo Đại aside and established the government of the Republic of Vietnam. Fear that the success of the Vietnamese communists would lead to a domino effect, spreading global communism and threatening liberal governments. President Eisenhower declared support for Diem in southern Vietnam. In the picture, the Vietnamese President Ngô Đình Diệm was shaking hands with President Eisenhower when he arrived at the Washington National Airport in 1957. And how it escalated. In November 1963, 3 weeks before Kennedy's assassination in Dallas, Ngô Đình Diệm and his brother Ngô Đình Nhu were killed and overthrown by a group of his old generals. The unstable political situation in South Vietnam led to President Lyndon B. Johnson's decision to promote U.S. military and economic support. As the battle with the Democratic Republic of North Vietnam intensified, Congress approved the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, allowing Johnson to order bombing raids, which called the Operation Rolling Thunder, in February 1965. In March 1965, Johnson made the decision with the firm support of the American public to bring U.S. combat forces to the war in Vietnam. The number of combat troops stationed in Vietnam had increased steadily to an enormous number, at the request of General William Westmoreland and the approval of President Johnson. At the beginning of the war, the majority of people supported President Johnson's war decision because they believed it was a democratic war to liberate the South Vietnamese people from communist aggression. Some people objected but do not speak out directly. Until a video about the Vietnam War was broadcast on television, Americans realized the cruelty and ferocity of wars. They lost faith in the government and officially rised up against the Vietnam War. Many protests took place broadly with the participation of all classes, sexes, races, and religions. Many veterans after returning to the country diverted to anti-war supporters. However, some still believed the war was justified. The war had led to a deep division among the American people. War supporters argued that those who opposed were unpatriotic, elusive, and ungrateful. Opponents of the war think the supporters were conservative and aggressive. It is still widely believed that the biggest difference between supporters and opponents is age, when the majority of the protesters were young people and the supporters were older people. I personally think that the biggest difference between them is their beliefs, which differ according to their personal circumstances and experiences. The following evidences demonstrate that there was a diversity between the opponents of the war. They came from many different classes, education, and status, but they all found a way to fight for their beliefs, unlike the silent majority that President Nixon mentioned. Some succeeded and some did not, but they all faced hardship and criticism when expressing their opinions. Students were the most numerous in anti-war forces. After the Rolling Thunder bombing came against North Vietnam, small anti-war groups came together and worked together on a series of lectures on the topic held in universities. Then the first achievement was achieved at the University of Michigan in March 24, 1965, when it received the attention and support of the national community. 3,000 people participated in lectures and debated from the evening to the next morning. A huge number of anti-war classes were held in most universities. In some universities, a theme of war was broader, with racial, human rights, civil rights, bureaucracy, and leftist bureaucracy. However, the government had cracked down on anti-war activities violently. Specifically on May 4, 1970 at Kent State in Ohio, 4 students were shot to death by National Guardsmen on campus. The picture of a young woman, who was screaming and leaning over the body of one of those students, was shocked the whole nation. Many students at University of California, Berkeley expressed their anger through many posters against the war after the Kent State event. Here's some of their work. It said that on May 14, two more students were killed by state police at Jackson State College in Mississippi. The conflicts between the government and its people did not stop there. In June 1971, a classified document about American involvement in Vietnam War, the Pentagon Papers, were published by the New York Times make people more suspicious and distrustful of the government. Daniel Ellsberg, a military analyst who worked for the Department of Defense on the study, came to oppose the war and decided that the document should be made public to all Americans. This event also led to a historic lawsuit between the New York Times and the US government, when the Times and the Washington Post had to join their forces to protect the right to publish. After that, since the government had failed to prove harm to national security, the Supreme Court declared that publication of the paper was justified under the First Amendment protection of freedom of the press. Another intellectual who opposed the war was Martin Luther King Jr. Although this protest is not as much remembered as his struggle for civil rights, it has a significant role in his career and his subsequent activities. In his speech at the Riverside Church in New York in 1967, Beyond Vietnam, he said, "If American soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the other side must read Vietnam." His involvement in this issue surprisingly has sparked a wave of public outcry. Those who had supported him said that he was too extreme in combining civil rights and opposition to the war. He lost many of his allies in donation to his Southern Christian Leadership Conference formed shortly thereafter. Artists also took actions against the war. John Baez, a prominent folk singer at the time, refused to pay federal taxes to protest the war. She wrote a letter to the Internal Revenue Service to explain her reason and voice her grievances about the war. She said, I do not believe in war. I do not believe in the weapons of war. Not only by individual protests, many bands and singers have produced many songs with anti-war theme, encouraging and propagating their ideas to the public. Some of the most popular are Ohio, 1970, a protest song written and composed by New Young in reaction to the Kansas State shooting, or Blowing in the Wind in 1963. The song was written and recorded by Bob Dylan as the United States escalated their involvement in the Vietnam War. Did the anti-war movement succeed? This question has been asked by many researchers and received different opinions. One thing I know is that the cultural movements affected more or less on the outcome of the war either directly or indirectly. It constituted a wave of protest against the war both domestically and internationally. It put pressure on US government and helped Americans realize how bad the war was. And it also changed the war view on American politics and culture. Thank you for listening.